Hello, I'm Laura Williamson, and I'm happy to join you at SHUSH Day today. I'll be presenting on prediction of marine mammal auditory impact from different anthropogenic sources. First off, just a quick introduction to Ocean Science Consulting. The company was first incorporated in 2004, and we have offices in New Zealand, the UK, and Greece. We specialize in marine mammal mitigation and underwater noise, and our core services are provision of marine mammal observers, passive acoustic monitoring, acoustic deterrent devices, pingers, and things like that for mitigation. We also perform underwater noise measurement and propagation modeling, population viability analysis, so IPCOD. We also are JNCC and New Zealand DOC accredited marine mammal observer and passive acoustic monitoring training providers. And then if that wasn't enough, we also analyze remotely operated vehicle imagery to investigate the prey of marine mammals around offshore structures. So our core research is rigs to reefs, also MMO PAM analysis, and we use CPODs to investigate marine mammal echolocation detections. And we use that to inform net environmental benefit analysis, comparative assessments for decommissioning. We also work in wind farm, tidal energy, oil and gas, cable lay, harbor construction, defense, aquaculture, just any sort of sector that makes noise in the marine environment. We also wrote the MMO and PAM handbook. We are independent industry scientists, so we're not academics. However, we do publish, so we have over 50 publications so far. In recent years, we've published about 6 papers a year, and we invest a substantial amount of our profits back into R&D. These are just some of our recent publications. And this one here, Prediction of Marine Mammal Auditory Impact Risk from Acoustic Deterrent Devices used in Scottish Aquaculture, is the one that I'll be showing you results from today. We work with a long list of clients, and we work all over the world. So these are places that we've had projects throughout OSC's history, and we've got projects spanning most of this area currently, which keeps us on our toes. The talk is sort of split into 2 parts. The first part is a case study on ADDs in aquaculture. So this was a project we did last year for Nature Scot, which used to be called Scottish Natural Heritage. They're statutory advisors to the Scottish government on anything to do with nature and environment. And then the next part is just applying the same techniques to a different industry. So that's modeling blasting noise in a river. For the first part of the talk, we are using desk-based predictive modeling of acoustic deterrent devices. You might be wondering why we want to do predictive modeling. The main reason is that it's relatively cheap. There's no health and safety risks, and it provides you with a worst case scenario that you can use then in your management decisions. The context for this particular project was to investigate noise from acoustic deterrent devices that are used in salmon farming. They put the ADDs on the salmon pens to try and deter seals from predating the salmons. However, they can also cause unwanted noise, which can deter other species of marine mammals from the areas. This is our study location on the west coast of Scotland here. So this is Skye, this is the mainland of Scotland, and this is the Outer Hebrides out here. And all these little yellow spots are fish farms, active fish farms. So there's quite a lot of them in that area. The way we did this was to model acoustic propagation of ADDs at 2 sites. So this site here is a representative open site, and this here is our closed site. So at these 2 sites, there aren't actually any aquaculture facilities. So we weren't targeting any developer or anything. We also wanted to perform cumulative modeling to look at how a bunch of different aquaculture facilities might impact noise in the environment. So this used 23 sites. So that's all these different blue ones. And there actually are fish farms there, but we don't know if they use ADDs or what type of ADD they use. So this is a purely theoretical exercise. So that's the locations where we did the modeling. And in terms of the values that we use for modeling, those were all sourced from McGarry et al. 2020, and also the developer websites. So McGarry went to the different developers and asked them to provide details of the noise produced by their devices. So we used the source level in RMS, the frequency of the devices, and the duty cycle. We use the maximum reported duty cycle, so just to make it a worst case scenario for everything. We also wanted to look at how some fictional devices might behave. So this is just looking at how changing source level, frequency, duty cycle, the duration that a device is on, or the number of devices on simultaneously can change the impact. We used the locations and the device details that I just showed, and we incorporated environmental parameters, so bathymetry, sediment, the water temperature, salinity, speed of sound. We put all those into the model and used 2D ray tracing to estimate transmission loss throughout the environment. We exported results as sound exposure level using standard equations, and then estimated impact to marine mammals using the Southall exposure thresholds. And I believe he's next up, so that'll be interesting to see what he has to say about this. And then the results, this is the open water environment. This is just 4 of the devices that we modeled. And so the SEL is shown by the color of the background. Darker purple is lower and yellow is the highest. And then these are the hearing thresholds, those Southall hearing thresholds from the different devices. VHF TTS is your harbor porpoise, essentially, the very high frequency cetaceans. You can see those have the highest range of disturbance of TTS for each of the devices, except for this one, because this has a lower primary operating frequency. And then the same thing for the semi-enclosed location. And then if we look at the maximum distances that PTS and TTS would be predicted from the different devices, this is what it shows up as. So some of these devices, like the AirMar, is quite loud, so it can cause TTS up to 30 kilometers for the harbor porpoise. That is an absolute worst case scenario. It wouldn't be anywhere near that in real life. And I'll go into some caveats in a moment. But you can see there's quite a range between the different devices based on their source level and frequencies and things like that. And also the genus wave here has a lower frequency than the others. It actually causes potentially a higher impact to low frequency marine mammals than the other ones do. And that's just because it's producing noise at a lower frequency. And for the fictional devices we looked at changing source level. So this is going between 195 is the maximum source level that we investigate, and 165 was the lowest. So those are the ranges of the actual devices that we found. So we investigated that range of source levels. And as you would expect, reducing source level reduced the potential impact. This is just plotting it in terms of the distance at which very high frequency cetaceans would be expected to experience TTS. So as the source level increases, the distance at which they would likely experience TTS increases. For frequency, so this is the higher frequency that ADDs normally operate at, and this is a lower frequency that they can operate. This is for very high frequency cetaceans, so reducing the frequency reduces the impact to them. However, for the low frequency cetaceans, lowering the frequency causes an increase in potential impact to those species. You need to consider what frequency you're using based on what species you actually want to target and which species might be around in the environment that would be non-target species. Changing the duty cycle, we went from 10% all the way up to 100%, and that obviously increased the potential risk. So it sort of started to plateau at about 30 to 40% and didn't increase too much. So that's potential that sort of saturates the noise in the environment. Same thing is seen with the hours of operation. This is going from 1 hour of operation all the way up to on continuously, so 24 hours a day. And any more than about 16 to 18 hours, there wasn't a huge amount of increase. The same thing was shown with the number of ADDs active simultaneously. Anything more than about 6 ADDs, there was no increase in the range that VHF cetaceans might be expected to experience TTS. So all 3 of the 8, 12, and 16 devices operational simultaneously, the line of expected TTS is right on top of each other. And I did check that multiple times because it just looked too perfect to be true, but that's what the model said. And then we just plotted one. This is the absolute worst case scenario. So the loudest source level of 195 decibels, the higher frequency. So this is targeting the high frequency, very high frequency cetaceans, operating 100% duty cycle at 24 hours a day. And this is just for one device, but you can see that the noise can affect quite a large area. In terms of the cumulative modeling, so this is looking at 23 fish farms with one device active at any one time on a 10% duty cycle at the higher frequency that we chose and operating for 24 hours at a source level 165 decibels, which is the lowest that we investigated. You can see the yellow here is quite limited in where it's going. However, if you're operating at the higher source level, 195 decibels, then you can see it covers really quite a large area of the Minch. So that's a potential concern for managers because there's a variety of different types of acoustic deterrent devices that are used, and it's important to know what impact that's having on the environment. I mentioned there's some caveats about this. So the models are definitely the worst case scenario. We've compared model results to empirical field trials previously, and the models are always much worse than the field trials. We're using developer reported source levels, not performing any field trials or using data from other people's field trials. And that was a choice on our part to try and limit the amount of variation between different devices. We also used a non-fleeing model for our animals, and that was, again, to make it the worst case scenario, but also the marine mammals live in this environment and they don't all just run away or swim away. They do actually live there. So it's not really realistic to use a fleeing model for this because we know that they're around and these ADDs have been used for decades and is still a very high density area for marine mammals. We also did not include background noise, which would act to reduce the range of potential impact. And we assumed there was no directionality issues. The second project that I'm going to show you, just very briefly, is doing essentially the same thing, but modeling this time from explosive noise in a river. This is using explosives during harbour expansion on the River Clyde in Glasgow, using pretty much the same methods. A couple of differences. Instead of ray tracing, I use normal modes, just because the water was so shallow and the frequency was much lower. Just in case you're wondering, these explosions did not actually happen. This was just a modeling exercise to show them what the potential impact would be if they were to do the blasting. They were interested in marine mammals and fish. This is the range that fish might be expected to suffer mortality or mortal injury. So it's up to about 150 meters from the blasting site. And then marine mammals, this is the same sort of PTS, TTS as the previous example. Again, these go up to about 300-400 meters for the harbor porpoise type species because they have the lower exposure threshold. So that's it for that. In conclusion, acoustic propagation modeling is a useful tool. It allows prediction of potential impacts. However, it should ideally be ground truthed with empirical data because, as I've shown, it is the worst case scenario. So if you need to know the range of impacts for mitigation or management, then it's best to have some actual data on what the noise is. So it's often used in baseline assessment, and it can be used with anything that makes noise underwater. So that would be piling or explosives, ADDs, sonar, dredging, drilling, or any number of other applications. And it can also be used to inform other modeling. So you can use this to estimate the range of disturbance, and then you can estimate the number of animals that might be in that area and input that into population consequences of disturbance or PCOD or PCAD modeling. And then there's a lot of other applications. If you've got any questions, I think there's a question and answer session after the talks, but If you don't get to ask, then there's my email address and Victoria's, and if you have any other general questions about OSC, that's the link. Thank you very much for your attention.